in a hearing like this is extremely troubling. And it leads me to ask whether or not the other things you've been saying are false statements. And so because that's a provably false statement. You made a couple others that are provably false. And this is from the mouth of the FBI director.
The only one that made false statements is you.
My final question to you, Mr. Director, is do you know that it is a crime to lie to Congress? Do you know that? That's my last question.
I have not lied to Congress.
I didn't ask you that.
Lied to Congress is you.
Do you? I'm not testifying here, sir, and I don't.
The director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation is a lawyer. He graduated from Pace University School of Law. He passed the bar. He worked as a federal public defender. He prosecuted federal cases as an assistant United States attorney. He has cited those credentials in every congressional appearance since his confirmation. In May 2026, sitting before the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee, he was asked a question that any first-year law student could answer. Is lying to Congress a crime? He did not confirm that it was. The United States Code, Title 18, Section 1001, makes it a federal crime to knowingly make any materially false statement to a congressional committee. The maximum sentence is 5 years in federal prison. This is not a complicated area of law. It is one of the most straightforward provisions in the Federal Criminal Code. It is the same law that has been used to charge political figures across both parties for decades. The director of the FBI, a trained lawyer, either could not or would not confirm this in a formal Senate hearing. That is the credential gap. And it is where this documentary begins. Because what happened on May 12, 2026 in that hearing room was not just one explosive exchange. It was a pattern that tells you something specific about how the director of America's premier law enforcement agency has chosen to conduct himself before the Congressional Oversight Committee responsible for his agency's budget. To understand why this hearing was different from every Patel hearing that came before it, you need two pieces of context. The first is The Atlantic. In April 2026, The Atlantic published an investigative article raising serious questions about Director Patel's personal conduct and fitness to lead the Bureau. The article cited more than 24 sources. Patel responded by filing a $250 million defamation lawsuit against the magazine. He called the reporting fabricated. The Atlantic said it stood by every word and would vigorously defend the lawsuit. That lawsuit was active and unresolved on the day of this hearing. The second is the internal FBI situation. By May 2026, multiple press organizations had reported on a series of controversies surrounding Patel's directorship. Reports of personally branded liquor bottles. Questions about the use of FBI aircraft. Allegations about what some inside the Bureau called a payback squad. Claims about manipulation of crime statistics. And a separate report from NBC that Patel had been called to the White House on July 10, 2026 over his behavior and a social media post described as the gold-plated tweet. That was the context in which Patel sat before the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on May 12, 2026. And the senator who produced the most significant exchange of the day was Chris Van Hollen of Maryland. What happened in those minutes raised a specific legal question that has not been seriously examined by any coverage of this hearing.
Lawsuits. So today, as you testify before Congress, is it your testimony that those allegations are categorically false?
Unequivocally, categorically false.
So there have been no occasions during your tenure when FBI personnel were unable to promptly reach you?
Absolutely not. You can ask my entire workforce. They hear from me at every single hour of the day, as do these great gentlemen here, as do the men and women of the interagency and state and local law enforcement and the White House.
And so there have been no occasions when your security detail had difficulty waking or locating you, is that right?
Nope, it's a total farce. I don't even know where you get this stuff, but it doesn't make it credible because you say so.
I'm not saying it, Director Patel. It's been...
Before we get to the perjury question, let us deal with what Patel said about Senator Van Hollen. Because the specific claim he made in that hearing was subsequently fact-checked by CNN, and the finding matters for understanding the overall pattern of this appearance. In response to Van Hollen's questioning about the Atlantic article, Patel shifted to an attack on the senator. He referenced Van Hollen's visit to El Salvador, where the senator had met with Kilmar Obrego Garcia, the Maryland resident the Trump administration had deported by mistake and who remained in El Salvador despite court orders requiring his return. Patel suggested Van Hollen had been drinking on the taxpayer's dime during that visit. He made specific reference to a margarita. He then posted on social media referencing campaign finance records showing a large restaurant bill. CNN reviewed the facts and found the claim misleading on multiple specific grounds. The restaurant bill was from a campaign finance report, not a federal appropriations account. Campaign funds are not taxpayer funds. The bill was described in the filing as catering, which includes food as well as any beverages. Van Hollen said the expense was for a staff holiday party. And the El Salvador meeting itself was a separate, earlier event, not connected to the restaurant bill at all. The FBI director had made a specific factual allegation on the floor of a Senate hearing. A major news organization fact-checked it and found it misleading on the specifics. That is the documented record. Here is why this matters for the legal question that came moments later. When a senior official makes a factually imprecise claim in a congressional hearing, and then in the same hearing declines to confirm that making false statements to Congress is a crime, the juxtaposition is not coincidental. It is the credential gap in its sharpest form. Now let us get to the legal question that defines this hearing. Perjury before Congress is a federal crime under two separate provisions of the United States Code. Section 1001, which covers false statements to federal officials including members of Congress and their committees. And Section 1621, which covers perjury specifically, making a false statement under oath in any proceeding before Congress. Both provisions have been used to charge, prosecute, and convict Americans across political parties for decades. They are foundational elements of the federal criminal code. Any attorney who has practiced federal law understands them. Any law school graduate who took a criminal law course has encountered them. Kash Patel is a federal attorney. A former federal prosecutor. A man who has spent years navigating the precise legal distinctions that federal criminal law requires. When he was asked in that hearing whether lying to Congress is a crime, the wording of what he said and did not say has been analyzed by multiple legal commentators since the hearing. The director of the FBI, trained in law, appearing before the Oversight Committee that funds his agency, declined to give a simple yes to a question that has a simple yes answer. The psychological and rhetorical analysis published by researchers reviewing the May 12 testimony noted that this was among the analytically significant moments of the hearing, specifically because it was a refusal rather than a mistake. A trained lawyer does not fail to recall whether perjury is a crime. The choice not to confirm it is deliberate. Here is what makes that choice significant in this specific context. Members of the same committee have suggested on the record that some of Patel's previous congressional testimony may not have been fully accurate. Representative Madeleine Dean of Pennsylvania asked him directly if CNN's political analysis team published a piece the day after this hearing with a specific characterization worth examining carefully. They wrote that rarely has an appearance epitomized the administration's utter disdain for accountability like FBI Director Kash Patel's congressional hearing on Tuesday. That is a strong editorial characterization from a major news organization. And it is worth explaining what specific documented behavior produced it, not as a political judgment, but as a factual inventory. In one hearing, Patel made a factual allegation about a sitting senator that was subsequently found misleading by fact-checkers on multiple specific grounds. He declined to confirm that lying to Congress is a federal crime. He attacked multiple members of the committee personally rather than addressing the substance of their questions. He positioned congressional oversight itself as a form of political attack rather than a constitutional function. Each of those things individually would be notable. Together, in a single hearing, they produced a pattern that CNN's political team described with the word disdain. Now, CNN is an editorial organization with its own perspective. Their characterization is clearly labeled as their analysis. But the underlying documented facts that produced that characterization, the misleading claim, the declined legal confirmation, the personal attacks, the dismissal of oversight, those are on the official Senate record. And they connect directly to a development that happened 7 weeks after this hearing. One that suggests Patel's behavior in that room was not invisible to the people who appointed him. On July 10, 2026, NBC News reported that Kash Patel had been summoned to the White House. The reason? Questions about his behavior and a social media post that had generated internal concern. The White House, according to that reporting, had not been publicly defending Patel by name for months. The man who was called to the principal's office on July 10, 2026 was the same man who declined to confirm perjury is a crime on May 12. That timeline is part of the documented record. And what happens next in that timeline is what Part 2 of this documentary is going to examine.
Director, thank you for your service. I yield back.
Ms. Dean.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Meng, Chairman Cole, Ranking Member DeLauro. And thank you, Mr. Patel, for your testimony and for being here today. I've been looking at the President's 120-word FBI budget request, the so-called skinny, I'll call it Ozempic request, that states that, quote, the undoing of the weaponization of the FBI is one of the administration's top priorities. The weaponization of the FBI is something that deeply concerns me. It should concern all of us. And yet, since taking office, President Trump has been on a revenge tour. He has targeted individuals, universities, law firms, with executive orders to cut them out or to make them come under his will. He has used ICE to disappear U.S. citizens without due process, and he's fully ignored a unanimous Supreme Court order, and then over the weekend wasn't sure if he was obligated to uphold the Constitution of the United States.
Representative Madeleine Dean of Pennsylvania asked the FBI director a question that contains two specific words worth examining carefully: memory or veracity. Those are not interchangeable. They represent two completely different categories of concern about congressional testimony. Memory is a cognitive limitation. A witness who misremembers a date, misstates a number, or confuses the sequence of events is not necessarily being dishonest. They are recalling imperfectly. Courts and congressional committees make allowance for genuine failures of memory, which is why witnesses are typically given the opportunity to correct the record and why perjury requires knowing intent to deceive rather than mere inaccuracy. Veracity is a different category entirely. Veracity refers to truthfulness. A witness whose veracity is questioned is not being accused of forgetting. They are being accused of choosing to say something that is not accurate. When Dean asked whether the committee should be more concerned about Patel's memory or his veracity, she was asking him to locate himself on that spectrum. Was his prior testimony imprecise because he genuinely did not recall? Or was it imprecise for a different reason? Patel's response was to say the committee should worry about Dean's lack of candor. He then positioned himself as a target of the weaponized FBI rather than its director. He did not answer whether the committee should worry about his memory or his veracity. He redirected. Again. The credential gap was now fully visible in both hearings. The man who will not confirm perjury is a crime is also the man who will not say whether concerns about his testimony are about his memory or his honesty. These are not difficult questions for a trained lawyer. They are foundational distinctions that any attorney who has examined a witness understands immediately. The choice not to answer them is documented on two separate official congressional. Beyond the individual exchanges, the May 2026 hearing produced a documented inventory of institutional concerns about the Federal Bureau of Investigation under Patel's leadership that deserves its own examination. 3 specific claims circulated in reporting leading up to and following this hearing. All 3 are labeled here precisely as they should be, as reporting that Patel disputes and that has not been fully adjudicated in court or confirmed through official federal proceedings. The first was personally branded liquor bottles. Reports indicated that Patel had authorized or was associated with FBI-branded merchandise including liquor bottles described in at least one account as gold-plated. Patel has not confirmed this characterization publicly. The reference to the gold-plated tweet in the NBC July 10 report appears connected to this story. The second was what multiple internal sources described as a payback squad. The allegation, reported by Politico and other outlets, was that a specific group inside the Bureau was being used to build cases against individuals identified as political opponents of the administration. This allegation is unconfirmed and actively disputed by Patel. The third was manipulation of crime statistics. Reporting raised questions about whether the crime reduction figures Patel has cited repeatedly in congressional hearings as evidence of his leadership's success accurately reflect the Bureau's direct contribution to those numbers, or whether categories were widened to credit the FBI for outcomes primarily produced by state and local law enforcement. Patel has disputed the characterization. What is confirmed is this: each of these allegations was circulating in the public record when Patel sat before the Appropriations Subcommittee in May 2026. Each of them was connected in some way to the questions about accuracy that Dean raised in her memory or veracity question. And the director who declined to confirm perjury is a crime was the same director who declined to give direct answers about any of them.
Now reporting suggests Donald Trump isn't so happy with the job Patel is doing. The FBI director abruptly canceled a planned flight Friday to see his girlfriend in Chicago just as he was preparing to leave after top administration officials, frustrated with Patel, summoned him to the White House, according to two people with knowledge of the change. There appear to be several reasons for Patel's recall. Some in the White House reportedly found it confounding that the FBI director was leaving town amid the recent revival of the war with Iran and alleged threats against the president's life, according to a person familiar with efforts to help Patel rebuild trust with the White House. Another issue seems to be reported.
Seven weeks after the May 12 hearing, NBC News published an exclusive report. Kash Patel had been summoned to the White House. The stated reasons, according to NBC's reporting, questions about his behavior and a social media post described as the gold-plated tweet. The report also noted that White House officials had not publicly defended Patel by name for several months. That last detail deserves specific attention. A sitting FBI director whose appointment was made by the current president. An administration that has consistently used its senior officials to defend each other publicly in the press and on social media. And a White House that had, according to NBC, stopped saying Patel's name out loud in his defense. The silence is documented. The summons is documented. The reasons cited are documented in NBC's reporting. What is not documented, and what neither NBC nor any other outlet has been able to confirm, is what was said in that White House meeting, what consequences, if any, resulted from it, and whether the meeting represents a temporary correction or the beginning of a leadership change at the FBI. What Politico had reported 3 months earlier is relevant context here. Politico reported that things were not looking great for FBI Director Kash Patel, suggesting that he appeared likely to be the next high-ranking official to exit the administration. The White House summons in July came one day before Patel took what NBC described as a familiar step. He extended the FBI purge campaign. He continued the pattern of personnel actions that has defined his directorship since confirmation. Whether that extension was a response to the White House pressure or a defiance of it is not something the current public record can confirm. What the current public record shows is the sequence. May 12 hearing, explosive exchanges, misleading claim, declined perjury confirmation, questions about veracity. July 10, White House summons. July 11, extended purge. The sequence is the documented story. Here is the complete credential gap. Kash Patel is a trained lawyer. A former federal prosecutor. A man who has cited his legal credentials in every congressional appearance since his confirmation as FBI Director. In May 2026, before the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee, he was asked whether lying to Congress is a crime. He did not confirm that it is. In a related hearing, when asked whether the committee should be more concerned about his memory or his veracity, he redirected to an attack on the questioner rather than addressing either option. When asked about The Atlantic's reporting on his conduct, he called the allegations unequivocally and categorically false and filed a lawsuit. The Atlantic has said it stands by every word and will vigorously defend against what it calls a meritless action. When he made a specific factual allegation about a senator in that same hearing, it was subsequently found misleading on multiple specific grounds by CNN's fact-checking team. And 7 weeks later, he was summoned to the White House over questions about his behavior. The credential gap is this: the things a trained lawyer should know and say without hesitation, that perjury is a crime, that congressional oversight is a constitutional function, that factual accuracy in a Senate hearing is a legal obligation, are precisely the things that Kash Patel declined to confirm when the context made confirming them inconvenient. That is a documented pattern. Not an accusation. Not an interpretation. A pattern built from official congressional records, confirmed news reporting, and the words of the director himself. 3 things to watch as this story continues. First, the Atlantic lawsuit. If it proceeds to discovery, the documentary record of Patel's personal conduct that the Atlantic's sources described will be tested under the legal standard of sworn deposition testimony. Discovery produces answers that hearings cannot compel. Second, the White House relationship. The silence of the administration in publicly defending Patel is documented. Whether that silence continues, deepens, or ends with a formal action will determine how this chapter of the FBI's institutional story closes. Third, the Driscoll lawsuit. Active in federal court. Discovery in that case will produce documentation of personnel decisions that Patel has declined to discuss in detail in any congressional hearing. The legal standard of civil discovery operates independently of what a director chooses to say or not say before Congress. Here is what this documentary cannot tell you: whether Kash Patel will remain FBI director by the end of this year, whether the Atlantic lawsuit will survive early motions, whether the White House summons was the beginning of a transition or a temporary correction. What this documentary can tell you is what the documented record shows. A trained lawyer who declined to confirm perjury is a crime. A factual allegation found misleading on multiple specific grounds. A question about memory or veracity that was never answered. And a White House that has gone quiet. 2 questions for the AVA Reports community. The first. A lawyer who has been questioned about the accuracy of his own congressional testimony declined to confirm that lying to Congress is a federal crime. Do you believe that refusal was a legal strategy, a genuine oversight, or something else entirely? Tell me specifically what you think it was. The second. The White House had not publicly defended Patel by name for months before the July summons. Based on the documented pattern from May to July 2026, the misleading claim, the perjury question, the summons, do you believe Kash Patel will still be FBI director 6 months from today? Drop both answers below. We read every comment. Subscribe to AVA Reports and hit the notification bell. The next documentary in this series tracks what happens when the discovery process in the Driscoll lawsuit begins producing answers that no congressional hearing has been able to compel. Thank you for watching.